Part 24. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 244. Hey. Dr. Oak came over with a smile. Xiu had been here for so long and rarely saw him smile so happily. Doctor, we're almost done here. If there's nothing else, I'll go over first. Xiu felt that his presence was a bit out of place in such a scene. Besides, he also had his own things to do, so he just took this opportunity to go back and relax. Why are you in such a hurry? Let me introduce you first. Dr. Oak pulled Xiu over and said, maybe you have already known each other just now, but I still want to introduce you. This is Xiu, and she is my granddaughter Nanamai Oak. Xiu didn't speak, and Nanamai didn't speak either. The two just looked at each other for a while and then looked at Dr. Oak. Where's Xiaomao? Go and call Xiaomao down. I bought some snacks that you like. Dr. Oak walked to the side and took out the tea set that Xiu had just washed, and then walked out of the kitchen with Nanamai. Xiu was also surprised to hear that Professor Oak was going to buy snacks. Although Professor Oak was not an old-fashioned person, on the contrary, he was quite open-minded, but there were not many people he could cater to. Grandpa. Xiaomao was brought down from the second floor by Nanamai, but when he saw Professor Oak, he just gave a bland greeting and even turned his eyes away, not intending to look at Professor Oak for a second time. However, Professor Oak did not care, and waved to Xiaomao and said, "Come here and let Grandpa see you. You have grown a lot this year. Xiaomao will be an adult soon." However, Xiaomao did not move after hearing this, and stood there blankly, his eyes darting around. Nanamai saw that Xiaomao did not move, so she went over and took his hand and said, "Come here, Grandpa is calling you." "Here are snacks." Dr. Oak looked at Xiaomao who was coming over, and the awkward smile on his face just now gradually stretched out. Looking at his grandson, Dr. Oak murmured, "He's thinner. He used to be chubby." Dr. Oak stretched out his hand but Xiaomao dodged it. Seeing his appearance, Dr. Oak could only change his hand from stretching out to waving, saying, "Come on, don't stand there." Yes, Nanamai nodded to Dr. Oak, then dragged Xiaomao to the sofa and pressed him down. This brother really made her worry. "Come, let me introduce you, this is my grandson Oak Shigeru." Dr. Oak proudly introduced Xiaomao to Xiu. Xiu had nothing to say about this and nodded. It's just that Xiaomao didn't seem to care about Xiu's existence. He just glanced at him lightly, with an arrogant look. Xiu watched their conversation from the side and soon he also noticed that something was wrong with Dr. Oak. He was timid and humble, not like the Dr. Oak in Xiu's impression at all. And the reason can only be Xiaomao. Of course, who can't see it so obviously, but what's the reason? This was originally Professor Oak's family affair. Logically, he shouldn't say anything, but seeing Professor Oak like this, Xiu seemed a little unhappy. "How much injustice did you suffer? Who are you showing this face to? Treat an old man like this, and this old man is your grandfather." He didn't say anything because he didn't know the reason, but just pretended to be stupid and dazed. It's difficult for a judge to judge family affairs. For such things, he would just be a keyboard warrior and complain a few words in his heart. He really didn't dare to do it. "Doctor, I'm waiting for you to feed them in the backyard." Xiu couldn't stand the atmosphere, so he just made an excuse and slipped away. "Okay," Professor Oak waved his hand, and then said, "You go back first." "Understood." Xiu had been waiting for this sentence for a long time, and he immediately responded and retreated when he heard it. After Xiu left, Nanamai said to Professor Oak with some embarrassment, "Is that brother really Grandpa's assistant? I thought he just came to help clean up." Professor Oak didn't care. After all, he hadn't hired an assistant for a long time, and it was not surprising that his granddaughter would think so. "What did you talk about just now?" "No questions, just some family matters." Suddenly, Nanamai asked a very strange question. I can't see him, why is that? Xiu is different from ordinary people, it's normal that you don't understand him, anyway, you just need to have less contact with him, and his elves, especially Casey, don't get close to him, you kids can't bear it. Some things can't be said clearly, Professor Oak can only give a little hint. Although she didn't understand, Nanami still knew that Grandpa wouldn't hurt her, but why did she see something different? Come and tell Grandpa what interesting things happened this year. Soon, some conversations sounded in the hall, but they were all Professor Oak and Nanami talking, and he would reluctantly say one or two words when talking about Xiao Mao. It's better to be in the research institute, at least you don't have to suffer in that awkward atmosphere. Xiu was wandering in the backyard. At this hour, the elves were lazily waiting for dinner, and only Casey and Mantis hadn't stopped training, each doing their own thing. The original training for high-speed movement was reclassified as training for the lower body. Now, Mantis is trying to find the feeling and use high-speed movement under the change. With the increase in weight, Mantis is now more stable when using high-speed movement, but the distance has decreased, and he still can't turn. This problem has troubled Xiu for a long time, but it has not been solved until now, and the skills that were previously suitable for Scythe are no longer suitable for it, and they have to practice again. Fortunately, they all have time and can wait. Casey's training method is still invisible to outsiders, but Xiu can roughly feel the flow of superpowers in Casey over there. Ordinary people, even elves, dare not approach, only Xiu dares to walk over. Casey did not speak, but opened his eyes and looked at Xiu, but Xiu closed his eyes. If someone who didn't know would think he was in a daze, but now Xiu and Casey are in telepathy. If the words are used to describe it, the feeling will be distorted, so it is better to let Xiu feel it directly. After a long time, when Xiu opened his eyes, he retreated directly and turned back to the warehouse to prepare for dinner. Casey is the one he trusts most among them. His IQ is not much worse than that of normal people, and even his memory is terrifying. Casey is also the only Pokemon that can think and correct itself without his help. It can handle any problem by itself. Although Mantis has the ability to think for itself, it needs to start with a clear mind before it can enter. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 245. After finishing the chores with Xiao Chun, Xiu had no intention of going to the kitchen, but instead took out the camping equipment from before. Come, you go to the river and help me wash rice. After Xiu gave Xiao Chun a task, he set up an alcohol stove under the shade of a tree. When Xiao Chun came back, he put the rice in a metal lunchbox and set it on the fire to roast. When he heard the sound, Xiu took off the container and put it into an insulated bag rolled up from old clothes. He didn't forget to explain to Xiao Chun. When the water content of this kind of open fire cooking is reduced, it is easy for the bottom part to be cooked or even burnt due to the temperature difference between the upper and lower parts. However, the rice on the top is not yet fully cooked, so the heat is about the same. Xiu didn't know what Xiao Chun meant by heat, so he paused for a moment before continuing. When you hear the bubbling sound is sparse, you can take it out and put it in something warm to use the residual heat to heat it. This way the rice will be soft and delicious without being cooked. Then we can take advantage of this time to cook. Xiu set up a small pot, threw all kinds of strange things into it, and said something to Xiao Chun while stirring the contents in the pot. Today we will try the tokiwa dish we learned before. This diced meat and vegetable soup is not as simple as it looks. There are many details in it, the most important of which is that it must use vegetables produced in Javan forest. Xiao Chun sat quietly aside, just watching Xiu's operation, with a very relaxed expression. The rice is ready. Xiu opened the lunch box, and a stream of hot steam steamed out, condensed into white mist in the air, and then dissipated. Xiu divided the rice into 2 bowls, and then used a spoon to pour the tokiwa-style soup on top. The thick soup sinks between the rice grains, exposing large pieces of vegetables and meat on the rice noodles. The aroma is rich and attractive, and the look alone makes people appetizing. Come. Try the thick soup rice bowl I made. Xiu handed the rice bowl over, and then quickly took a portion himself, stirring the rice and soup together with a spoon. When he found Xiao Chun looking at him, he couldn't help but smile and said, "I like to eat like this, you can try it too." After saying that, he ate a big mouthful, but in the next second he breathed out hot breath quickly and swallowed the food wholeheartedly. It's a little hot. Xiao Chun also stirred the rice in the same way, and then put the rice covered with soup into her mouth. After simply chewing, her century-old expression also changed a little. Although it was not obvious, her next actions also changed. Explain something. Eat slowly, don't be in a hurry. We can use the remaining soup to cook noodles later. This is also very good. Xiu was very happy to see Xiao Chun appetizing. This is a recognition of his craftsmanship. The two of them were eating a simple lunch on the grass in the backyard. After one meal, the pot was completely eaten. I have to say that Xiao Chun looks like this, but he is actually quite edible. Daramu had no intention of coming back in the afternoon. He couldn't go up to the second floor to do research alone without anyone around, so he had to close the door and play in the backyard. But after he trained with the giant pincer mantis for a while, he discovered that Xiao Chun and Bobo were doing something strange under the tree. I mentioned before that I could try training Bobo because I was worried that she would be bored, but then I got busy and didn't pay much attention to these things. I didn't expect that she would actually train with Bobo now. But the way is a little strange. He mentioned before that Bobo's wings were damaged and it was unable to fly. The only parts that could be trained were its beak and claws. Now Xiao Chun is sitting under the tree, while Bobo is pecking at a branch as thick as an arm, and there are several broken branches next to it. And when it breaks the branch, Xiao Chun will feed Bobo and use food to induce it to train. It seems that Xiao Chun has mastered the method of controlling Bobo. Simplicity and crudeness are Xiu's first impression. Just be really tough. But after thinking about it for a moment, it seems that Xiao Chun doesn't understand how to train, and the current environment can only allow them to do this. On the contrary, this is the training plan that is most suitable for the current situation. He leaned over, and Bobo looked up warily when he saw Xiu coming over. His body seemed to be frozen. Xiu didn't bother to pay attention to this guy and just sat next to Xiao Chun. "How are you these days? Do you have any questions?" Xiao Chun turned slightly and looked over, then shook his head silently, raised his finger and pointed at Bobo to make a few gestures. "It's okay, I'm training it." "How did you come up with this?" "You have a great idea. It's rare for Bobo to trust you in such a short time. What newbies need is encouragement, and Xiu must act as a guide. If you don't obey, you will be hungry. This is what the instructor taught me before." Xiu froze for a moment after learning this, with a strange expression on his face. He wanted to say something but couldn't. He paused for a while before continuing. "I think you need to re-understand the relationship between humans and elves, or the way normal humans communicate. In the past, Xiu had been spreading common sense about human life to her, but Xiu had forgotten a very important point, that is, there are unique creatures like elves in this world. There are obviously some small problems with Xiaokun's understanding of elves. First of all, most elves are intelligent creatures. Some elves are smarter than humans, such as Casey. Xiu said a lot of things, probably deconstructing the relationship between humans and elves. Regardless of whether it is right or not, at least it is reasonable and much more reliable than her way. Xiao Chun also noticed that Xiu was somewhat dissatisfied with her behavior, and did not express her opinion much, just stayed beside Xiu and listened slowly. Xiu talked to Xiao Chun for a long time, and struggled to reshape some of her concepts. Fortunately, although her ideas were strange, she was still willing to listen to Xiu's opinions. The next morning, Xiu pushed open the door of the warehouse as usual, but found that there was an extra person outside, who was wandering in the backyard. "Good morning, Miss Nanami." Although Xiu was a little surprised why she came here so early, he did not ask. After all, this was someone else's place. "Good morning." Nanami stood up and approached the warehouse when she saw Xiu coming. "Brother, you don't have to call me that. You can just call me Xiaomei." "Well, you can call me Xiu too. I'm not much older than you." "Okay, brother. Just call me Xiu." "No problem, brother." Xiu turned his head and glanced at her, and didn't say anything more. It was just a name. She could call him whatever she liked. It was harmless. Nanami smiled when she saw Xiu didn't react. She turned her head and looked at the elves in the backyard and said, "I used to feed the elves when I came here. Now that brother is here, I have nothing to do." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 246. It was then that Xiu understood why she came so early and was hanging around the warehouse door. "As an assistant, I am responsible for those Pokemons," Xiu said casually and walked outside, releasing several Pokemons. It would be better to finish the work quickly than to flirt with girls. He has a lot of things to do. Nanami didn't seem too surprised when she saw the giant Clawmantis and the others. Obviously, she was mentally prepared for this, but she still said a few words. "Brother, your Pokemons are so strange." Xiu responded perfunctorily, and didn't mean to explain. He was doing his daily preparations. Perhaps seeing that Xiu didn't react much, Nanami didn't leave, but looked at Xiu's Pokemons and asked, "Why is this giant Clawmantis black? It looks so handsome." It turned out like this because something unexpected happened when it evolved." Xiu knew she was looking for a topic, and it was not good to be too rude, so he explained perfunctorily. "Is this little lucky egg also my brother's? It's so cute. My teacher brought it to me in class before, but the teacher didn't let us play with it." Nanami's attention was completely on the little lucky egg. She squatted beside it and looked at it, but she didn't reach out because she was worried about something. "I picked it up," Xiu replied casually, but his heart was not as calm as he looked. What Nanami said just now was amazing. If she said it was a Jigglypuff, it wouldn't be strange, but the little lucky egg is not available everywhere. It can only be said that the educational resources of the aristocratic school are really amazing. The little lucky egg can be used as a teaching material in class. Because Nanami's arrival interrupted his plan, he couldn't leave her alone here. He could only arrange activities for the giant Clawmantis and others, and he turned back to the warehouse to prepare breakfast for the elves in the backyard. "Ms. Nanami, I have work to do, so I'll leave you." Xiu thought she would stop outside, but she actually followed him into the warehouse. This made Xiu feel helpless, because Xiaochun was still sleeping inside. "I remember the warehouse wasn't like this before," Nanami said slowly after scanning the surrounding environment. As expected, Nanami startled Xiaochun inside as soon as she entered the warehouse. She came out in her light pajamas. Maybe it was too hot last night, causing her to sweat. Her clothes stuck to her body, and there were large sweat stains on her collar. Her hair was a little stuck together, and she looked a little unkempt. "Who is this?" Nanami was also a little confused. Obviously, Professor Oak forgot about this person and didn't tell her. "My sister," Xiu replied, and then went up to introduce Xiaochun. "She is Chun, you can call her Xiaochun." "Hello Xiaochun." Nanami tried to greet her, but Xiaochun was still expressionless, which made her look a little awkward. Seeing this, Xiu had to explain, She has a problem with her throat and can't speak normally. Nanami smiled and waved her hands when she heard this, and whispered, I'm fine. This is Professor Oak's granddaughter, Miss Oak. Nanami. Xiu pulled Xiao-kun's hand and introduced her. But Xiao-chun still didn't react, which seemed too plain. Xiu didn't mean to talk nonsense, and bowed to coax Xiao-chun back to change clothes, while he went to prepare food for the elves. Although Nanami was very curious about Xiao-chun, she still followed Xiu after a little hesitation. During the extremely boring communication, Xiu packed up his things and pushed the cart out of the warehouse. And Xiao-chun was already outside, leading Bobo to walk in the backyard. When Nanami saw Xiao-chun, her expression changed for a moment, but she quickly covered it up. Did she remember that this was not her clothes? Xiu did not notice this, but he was too lazy to care, so he just did his own work. He pushed the cart around the backyard, and Nanami followed him, which made him feel a little at a loss. Recently, Xiao-chun came to help him with his work and would be by his side. But today this person has a different identity. Following him is like a capitalist monitoring a worker, which makes him feel uncomfortable. More importantly, her identity is special, and it is really difficult for him to do anything. You know, he still owes Professor Oak 30 million. Xiu quickly speeded up his pace to finish the work and shrank back to his own small space. Nanami, who had just finished dealing with the elf in the backyard, was still by his side. Miss Nanami, what's the matter? Xiu was really speechless, so he could only hint at her. Grandpa and Xiaomao went out early in the morning, leaving me alone at home. Xiu smacked his lips, but couldn't say anything. It turned out that he had nothing to do, no wonder he was so idle. Okay, Xiu didn't bother to care about her, and turned to prepare dinner for the giant claw mantis. Xiao Fuden is not stupid at all, on the contrary, he is a little smart. When he saw Xiu preparing breakfast for them, he would leave his playmates and walk back. You are willing to come back? Xiu picked up Xiao Fuden, flattened it and rounded it, teased it for a long time before letting it go. This is yours, as he said. He pushed a bowl in front of Xiao Fuden. Xiao Fuden is really not good at anything, but he is the best at eating. He sat on the grass, pressed the edge of the bowl with his hands, and then buried his head in the bowl. How many times have I told you? Don't choke. Xiu reached out and grabbed its pants to lift it up. Sit down and eat slowly. After Xiao Fuden sat down, he took out the rations for Casey and the giant claw mantis. Xiu handed a spoon to the giant claw mantis. After the giant claw mantis evolved, its hands changed from sickles to claws, which made it more convenient. It no longer needed Xiu to feed it, and it could eat by itself with the help of tools. But then again, the giant claw mantis's mouth is very small and converges inward. It is almost impossible to find it when it is closed, especially its face is so black that only the eyes can be seen. This may be for defense. After distributing the rations, Xiu sat on the grass, chewing bread while taking out the notebook he brought with him to review the previous knowledge. Brother and the elves have a good relationship. Nanami came to the side when Xiu sat down. Not bad. Xiu closed the notebook and looked at her. What's the matter? Brother, are you annoyed by me? Nanami put her hands on her knees, her chin on her arms, and said with a bit of resentment, can't I chat with my brother when I have nothing to do? Sure, what do you want to talk about? Xiu didn't expect her to react so strongly. If he made her cry, Xiu felt that Professor Oak would tear him apart. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 247. Nanami changed her previous behavior and said with a smile, I heard from Grandpa that you are a breeder, brother. Absolutely. I learned it for the exam, but my level is actually average. Xiu reopened his notes and reviewed them while dealing with Nanami's questions. Women cannot affect my study. The two chatted for a while, and most of the content was mainly small talk. Xiu found that she seemed to be very interested in her previous experiences, but Xiu was also good at wrangling, so he just pretended to be stupid, or else just open up the topic. Nanamai also noticed that Xiu's mind was not on this at all. She pondered for a moment and looked up at him and asked, "Can I ask you a few questions?" "What do you want to ask?" Xiu became a little wary. "Is that okay?" Nanamai looked at him with eyes full of hope. "Ask, but my answer may not be the answer you want." Xiu closed the notebook with his backhand and looked up outside, his eyes slightly narrowed by the sunlight. "What do you think an elf is?" The first words Nanamai spoke made Xiu Hao puzzled. What did this mean? "Little elf, let's be friends, partners who support each other and go forward together." Xiu raised his head slightly and looked at her and asked, "What about you?" "An elf is an elf." Xiu was immediately speechless after hearing this. What's the difference between saying this and not saying it at all? "Brother, tell me your story with them." Nanamai moved to sit next to Xiu, looking at Casey and the giant claw mantis who were training not far away. "There is no story, just meeting and becoming a companion." Xiu opened the note again and focused on it. "Who doesn't talk nonsense?" The topic that had just opened up returned to the awkward conversation before, but the more curious she became about Xiu, the more she aroused Xiu's instinctive resistance. He doesn't think there's anything about him that attracts others, so others must have other motives for finding him. Especially this Nanamai didn't seem to care much about the quality of the conversation. Instead, she cared more about Xiu himself. Her curious eyes kept wandering over him. The two chatted for a while, but Xiu still looked indifferent, which made Nanamai feel frustrated several times. To be honest, Nanamai's level of speech is really useless for someone like Xiu. Maybe she felt bored too, so she stopped harassing Xiu and turned her attention to Xiaochun. This actually made Xiu have to take her move. Of course I can tolerate her harassment due to my character, but Xiaochun is cognitively deficient. If she is provoked, she will backhandedly. Not to mention that Nanamai was killed, even if she was slightly frightened, it would cause a lot of trouble. Besides, Droki already had a problem with Xiaochun. Xiu had no choice but to change his words and said to Nanamai, "I'm going to the Murasame Botanical Garden. Do you want to come?" Since the Murasame family and the Oki family are family friends and have a very deep connection, Nanamai will naturally care about them. As expected, Xiu's words suddenly brought Nanamai's attention back. "Okay. I haven't been to Sister Linzi's place for a long time." After Xiu gave Xiaochun a few words, he and Nanamai walked over there. Originally just to kill her time, Xiu did not drive but walked slowly over. Along the way, maybe because he put down the book, Xiu talked a little more, but under his intentional or unintentional inducement, Nanamai still told some things about the Murasame family. Because the Oki family and the Murasame family are family friends, even if Nanamai did not grow up here, she can still get some information from the elders in the family. What surprised Xiu was that Murasame Rinko's parents were also extremely powerful trainers, at least according to Nanamai. At that time, Murasame's family was really not bad, with a lot of land and property, but these disappeared quickly after Murasame's parents passed away. It has to be said that her parents left without warning, and the family business was swallowed up in a short period of time, leaving only the botanical garden and a house. These blows to Kun Yulanzi, who was less than 10 years old at the time, must have been huge. Xiudu doubted whether he could survive in that situation. Not to mention that he has great perseverance, can endure loneliness, and is self-taught by relying on the books and materials left by his parents. His parents passed away and his family business was annexed. He endured the hatred for 10 years and became self-taught under the eyes of his enemies. In Xiu's opinion, this person is completely the prototype of the protagonist. Now what Murasame and Linza lack is to break out in one moment, kill the enemy with one hand and regain the foundation. It's a pity that Kureo Linza doesn't seem to know this yet. On the contrary, Nanami's words vaguely revealed. As soon as she saw the metal roof of the botanical garden, Nanami couldn't help but abandon Xiu and rush towards the mountain. Xiu, on the other hand, was still wandering leisurely. When he got up there, he found Nanami running to the bungalow. "This way!" Xiu shouted casually, without any intention of waiting for Nanami, but walked straight towards the botanical garden. At this time, he probably knew what Kanyulinza was doing. Xiu entered the lush plants with a relaxed and leisurely expression, and found Kanyulinza, who was recording something in a familiar location. "Miss Linza." "Repair," Kanyulinza responded happily, then raised the notes in his hand. "I have some new discoveries, please come and take a look." Xiu looked at her and said with a smile, "Don't worry about this, look who's coming." After that, Xiu stepped aside. Murayurenko looked behind Xiu curiously, and saw a person rushing out from the plants and trotting towards her. Murayurenko could only subconsciously stretch out her hand to block the person, and when she looked closely, she found that the person was Nanami. "Xiaomei. Why are you here?" "Sister Lindsay, I haven't seen you for a long time." Nanami hugged her like a spoiled child. The difference between the two can be clearly seen when they hugged each other. Nanami's height is at least one head shorter than Murayurenko. Nanami leaned for a while, then let go of her arms and stepped back to look at Murayurenko and smiled. "Sister Lindsay, are you surprised? Why did you come here without telling me?" Murayurenko also showed a smile on his face. "I came back yesterday afternoon. I just dealt with those things," Nanami said, looking at Xiu, and said with a smile, "Brother seems to be very familiar with Linza's sister. How long have you two known each other?" Xiu looked at Nanami's quirky look and shook his head helplessly, and said casually, "Anyway, it's longer than I've known you." Nanami was stunned when she heard this. Obviously, she didn't expect Xiu's words, so she had to look around awkwardly. Just a quick look and she found that the botanical garden at this time was quite different from what she remembered.